All right, our correspondent Akshay Dongre joins us for more on this important story. Akshay, good morning. Now, Israel has said that ceasefire will resume after it carried out deadly strikes on Hamas. At the same time, we have US Vice President J.D. Vance skeptical about the ceasefire as he likened the days ahead to hills and valleys for the ceasefire implementation. Put all this together, how do we expect the issue? How do we expect the days ahead to pan out when we talk of the situation there?
Well, given the history of these two parties as far as this conflict is concerned, the upcoming days are going to be as challenging as they were, the last few days ever since the ceasefire started. And in just a few days after a much, a pressured ceasefire by the US and the Western allies, along with the West Asian nations, who all put pressure both on Israel and Hamas together to end this conflict once and for all, start with the ceasefire, return of the hostages, and withdrawal of the Israeli Defense Forces from Gaza Strip. However, just in a few days, we are witnessing these kind of instances. Several people have been killed by the IDF attacks that have been carried out against Hamas targets. Two Israelis have been killed in attacks by militants, and now this perhaps can be seen as one of the biggest tests of the US brokered ceasefire. However, the pressure remains constant as far as US is concerned. Now, for whatever reason, it's for the best as far as this pressure is concerned, because unless there was a pressure from the US and other countries that have mainly supported Israel, the conflict would have once again broken out in the troubled waters there. So the next days are going to be challenging. It is going to be quite a task for the world leaders to ensure that both the parties remain true to their word, and if there are attempts, because there will be attempts from both sides, and especially the rogue elements from Hamas and the far right elements from the Israeli government and IDF as well, probably to try and end the ceasefire and try and start the military operations against their adversary once again, because the hatred is such for so many years, for decades, that though there is pressure, we can pretend that the ceasefire has been implemented, but all is still not well. So the underlying issues still remain, and that perhaps is the reason why the days ahead are also going to be quite as challenging as they have been when they were attempts to implement a ceasefire between the two.
All right, actually, in the midst of it, what role can the world leaders play now, given the fact with the ceasefire implementation, at the same time the Israeli hostages released and Palestinian prisoners also released, but at the same time we see the violation of ceasefire. Put all this together, what kind of influence can the world leaders now have on Israel and Hamas?
Well, if we are talking about major powers of the world, including the US especially, that has been primarily supporting Israeli Defense Forces, Israeli government against the operations in Gaza, or the West Asian countries that have supported Hamas, the world leaders can keep the pressure constantly there. They can also ensure that no rogue elements can derail the peace process and end the ceasefire. So it is going to be limited to that, but ultimately the decision is going to be in the hands of the Israeli government and also the Hamas leadership to ensure that the rogue elements from their sides are not the ones who are able to, or who succeed in ending the ceasefire. So they will also have to make sure that the Israeli government and the Hamas leadership also ensure that their elements, especially the rogue ones, the far right ones, do not derail the ceasefire and monitor the situation, and ensure that the innocent people on both sides do not become a casualty, do not become do not get impacted by these kind of attempts that are being made to end the ceasefire and continue the fighting once again.
All right, Akshay, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for joining in with those details.